Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio from Monday, November 8th, 2021. White House begins the rollout of the soon-to-be-signed into law $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. House passed it late Friday, sending it to the president's desk. Former President Barack Obama telling the United Nations Climate Summit in Scotland that the U.S. still has a lot of work to do on this issue. Also criticizes China, Russia, and former U.S. President Donald Trump for their positions on what action is needed. COVID-19 vaccine private employer mandate regulations just issued by the federal government last week could affect over 80 million workers, put on hold by a federal appeals court while lawsuits against it are heard. We'll get White House reaction and speak to a Wall Street Journal legal affairs reporter. First Lady Jill Biden promoting coronavirus vaccines for young kids at a Northern Virginia school that was the first to administer the polio vaccine in 1954. COVID-19 travel restrictions from 30 countries to the U.S. lifted, and Attorney General Merrick Garland announcing a major international ransomware arrest and indictment. Reuters reports President Joe Biden and top officials in his cabinet are hitting the road to promote the $1 trillion infrastructure bill passed by Congress last week to explain when and where Americans can expect to see some of the funds in their communities. White House aides are planning a bipartisan signing ceremony for the bill as soon as this week, after it gained final passage on Friday night when Democrats who control the House of Representatives ended months of bickering and approved it. That from Reuters. The top officials include the Secretaries of Transportation, Energy, Interior, and Commerce, and the EPA Administrator. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was in the White House briefing room today.
Talk about what the campaign to sell this bill is going to look like, given it will take time for some of these projects to actually go into effect and to be completed, and the White House is 1 year out from the midterms, of course, which they have tied this bill to.
Well, I expect that that'll be led by the president traveling to show where the need is and where the action is. But I'm certainly eager to be part of that effort. Look, a lot of this sells itself because communities never needed to be persuaded that their bridge needed to be fixed or that their airport needed an upgrade or that their ports needed investment. They've been trying to get Washington to catch up to them. But I do think it's important for us to go out there, especially in communities where a member of Congress or the Senate played an important role. And as you know, members from both sides of the aisle played important roles in delivering this bipartisan win. And I can't wait to be out there celebrating good news.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, one of the earlier places where, as he said, the need is and the action is, will be Baltimore, Maryland. President Biden will be there at the port on Wednesday talking about this bill. More from Secretary Buttigieg on when the average American might see a difference from the money in the bill.
President Biden said Americans will start seeing the effects of the infrastructure bill within 2 to 3 months. Is that also your assessment? And just to follow up on Jeff's question, can you provide a more detailed timeline on when specific programs will go into effect?
So again, I would break it into the existing programs that we're just going to be able to plus up, and then the new ones that we're going to have to stand up. So with something like infra, raise, I think that sees more than a twofold increase in the authorized funding. So here you have, and by the way, they're not waiting on us in Washington to invent these construction projects, right? The communities are applying with them, and then we're just able to fund that many more. And we're already, even though I'm going through the applications for this year's raise program now, we will, in very short order, be working on next year's, and you'll see a notice go out. But again, some things, we need to stand up a whole new program. Safe Streets for All, reconnecting communities, healthy ports. And so that will take a little bit longer. Remember, this isn't 2009. This is an era where it's about making sure we hit every shovel-ready program to provide that immediate short-term boost for the economy. It's short-term, but it's long-term. That's why the president talks about looking back on this moment from the 2050s.
Do two more. Just to follow up on that, we were down in Mississippi talking to farmers who have had bridges closed down in their area for 2 or 3 years. So when exactly can Americans expect to see a difference in their lives? Will it be 2 to 3 months, or will it be sometime sooner?
Well, that's the beginning, right? I mean, the short answer is as fast as many of these agencies and workforces can absorb those dollars when the formula increases or when a new grant is available. So some things soon, but again, this is about many, many years ahead, starting now.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg in the White House briefing room. That infrastructure spending bill originally passed the Senate back in August by a vote of 69 to 30, 19 Republicans joining the Democrats in voting yes. And then on Friday, the U.S. House passed it by a vote of 228 to 206. Generally party line in the House, Democrats yes and Republicans no, except 13 House Republicans voted yes and 6 House Democrats voted no. CNN explains that a number of progressives who have consistently called for both the infrastructure and the separate economic package known as the Build Back Better Act to move together voted no on this legislation. One of the House Republicans who voted yes on infrastructure, Nicole Maliotakis of New York, and today she was asked on CNN about criticism she's received from other House Republicans.
This was from Madison Cawthorn, who tweeted, "Vote for this infrastructure bill and I will primary the hell out of you." Marjorie Taylor Greene said that you and others who supported this bill will feel the anger of the GOP voter. How scared are you of Madison Cawthorn and Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Look, I don't work for anybody except for my constituents, the people of Staten Island and Brooklyn. I'm going to do what's in their best interest. There are some who wanted to deny the president from being able to take any credit. That's the way they legislate. That's their business. But I'm going to do what's in the best interest of my country and my community, and that's that. But I'll say also that unfortunately there's a lot of misinformation out there about this bill, and people should be clear that there is another spending bill, and that's the bill that contains the 87,000 IRS agents. That's the bill that contains, the amnesty provisions and handouts to those who are in the country illegally. And that is the one that people are mostly upset and angry about. And I think that people have to differentiate that these are two different bills. And I think actually by passing this bipartisan infrastructure bill that we've actually undermined Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the socialist wing of the Democratic Party from being able to hold infrastructure hostage, and now they've lost their leverage. And I think that's an important thing to say. So at the end of the day, I think it was those of us who were willing to work in a bipartisan fashion to pass this that actually did what was in the best interest of America.
Congresswoman Nicole Maliotakis, Republican of New York, today on CNN. The House of Representatives not in session this week, so the earliest that a vote will take place could take place on that larger $1.75 bill, $1 trillion bill dealing with social spending and taxes would be next week. AP Dateline Glasgow, Scotland. Barack Obama expressed confidence at UN climate talks Monday that the Biden administration will ultimately get its $555 billion climate package through Congress and faulted U.S. rivals China and Russia for what he called a dangerous lack of urgency in cutting their own climate-wrecking emissions. The U.S. Climate Conference in Glasgow, Scotland is the former American president's first since he helped deliver the triumph of the 2015 Paris Climate Accord, when nations committed to cutting fossil fuel and agriculture emissions fast enough to keep the Earth's warming below catastrophic levels of 1.5 degrees Celsius. That was from AP. Here's from President Obama.
And obviously, we still have a lot of work to do. But last week, Congress passed President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure bill that will, among other things, create jobs manufacturing solar panels and wind turbines and batteries and electric vehicles, and build out the first ever national network of charging stations so families can travel across the U.S. in electric vehicles. And I'm confident that a version of President Biden's Build Back Better bill will pass through Congress in the coming next few weeks. And here's what it will mean when that bill does pass. That legislation will devote over $500 billion to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by over 1 billion metric tons by the end of the decade, at least 10 times more than any legislation previously passed by Congress. Along the way, it will reduce consumer energy costs, it will invest in a clean energy economy, it will create hundreds of thousands of jobs, and it will set the United States on course to meet its new climate targets, achieving a 50 to 52% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions below 2005 levels by 2030. So the U.S. is back.
Former President Barack Obama in Glasgow, Scotland at the International Climate Summit. During his remarks, he also mentioned former President Donald Trump and Trump's decision to have the U.S. leave the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. And then he mentioned that current President Biden reversed that.
Back in the United States, of course, Some of our progress stalled when my successor decided to unilaterally pull out of the Paris Agreement in his first year in office. I wasn't real happy about that. And yet, the determination of our state and local governments, along with the regulations and investment that my administration had already put in place, allowed our country to keep moving forward, despite hostility from the White House. The $90 billion investment that we made in 2009 helped to jumpstart the clean energy industry in the United States, and markets adapted, and so did consumers. And even when the Trump administration rolled back emissions requirements for automakers, along with regulatory changes and efficiency standards, many businesses chose to stay the course. They kept reducing emissions. They continued the transition to electric vehicles and energy-saving appliances. The ball had been rolling, and it didn't stop.
Former President Obama addressing COP26, the Conference of Parties 26th meeting, United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, Scotland. This is the second and final week of the conference. Later at a roundtable with young leaders, Barack Obama telling them to vote like your life depends on it, because it does. He says he understands their cynicism about politics, but that governments around the world will not act unless they feel pressure from voters. This is Washington Today. A headline at the Wall Street Journal: Federal Appeals Court temporarily blocks Biden administration vaccine rules for private employers. New Orleans-based court says COVID-19 vaccination and testing rules raise grave legal issues. That happened on Saturday. Coming up, we'll talk to the reporter who wrote that article. First, some reaction from the White House today with the Principal Deputy Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre.
We heard some initial White House response to the Fifth Circuit staying the OSHA rule, the vaccine or test mandate that was really take effect at the very beginning of next year. Is the White House concerned that the legal wrangling surrounding that rule could delay the implementation of that? And what's the administration's message to businesses and Americans, who are subject to that rule?
So broadly speaking, at least on the confidence, defending a policy is not a new thing from an administration, regardless if it's a Republican or a Democrat administration. This is something that happens all the time. The administration clearly has the authority to protect workers, and actions announced by the president are designed to save lives and stop the spread of COVID-19. And as DOJ said, they will be defending these lawsuits. But I also want to step back for a second, because there is precedence here. The Department of Labor has a responsibility to keep workers safe and the legal authority to do so. The Secretary of the Department of Labor determines workers at risk, or what is called the grave danger. And if you look around, and if we really zero in this past year, more than 750,000 people have died of COVID. You have approximately 1,300 people a day who continue to die a day, as I said, from COVID. If that's not a grave danger, I don't know what else is, right? So I want to be really clear as well, is that the Congress empowered OSHA through a law that has been in the books for more than 50 years. So this is an authority that we believe that the Department of Labor has. We are very confident about it, and just to say, this is about keeping people safe in the workplace, and it's critical and it's important to do. And so that's the message that we want to send out.
And specifically to a business owner who sees the headlines that the rule's been stayed now, should they prepare their employees now to get vaccinated, or should they wait while the school is
No, that's a great question. I appreciate the question. We think people should not wait. We say do not wait to take actions that will keep your workplace safe. It is important and critical to do, and waiting to get more people vaccinated will lead to more outbreaks and sickness. So this is about keeping people in a workplace safe. And what we're seeing is more businesses and school closures and most lost jobs, and keep us stuck in a pandemic that we're trying to end. We do not want that to happen. We're trying to get past this pandemic, and we know the way to do that is to get people vaccinated. So people should not wait. They should continue to move forward and make sure that they're getting their workplace vaccinated.
Deputy White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, and with more on the private employer COVID-19 vaccine mandate on hold for now, we're joined by Brent, Kendall, legal affairs reporter with the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for being with us. Why did the Federal Appeals Court issue this emergency stay?
Well, they didn't say a whole lot when they did it. This was on Saturday afternoon. All these lawsuits started being filed at the end of the last week, about 24 hours after the administration formally announced these rules. And so with some of these lawsuits, employers right away requested emergency intervention from courts saying, the compliance burdens and other costs for them would start immediately. And they said, dear court, please put this on hold for now while this litigation continues. And so a 3-judge panel on the Fifth Circuit did so. Their opinion was very brief, and it said that the administration's requirements raised grave statutory and constitutional issues, but they didn't say much more than that. So they froze the rules for now and suggested that they would have more to say soon. There are additional legal papers being filed. So, this is a temporary kind of thing, but it's right out of the gate. It's a hurdle for the administration.
What are some of the potential statutory and constitutional issues?
Well, so we don't even have full legal briefing or full arguments by both sides yet. The different lawsuits, and we don't know what most interested the Fifth Circuit, but the different lawsuits make an array of arguments. The one argument is that OSHA doesn't actually have the authority that's so sweeping to issue rules like this. There's another argument that says, well, maybe OSHA does have this authority because of the way Congress wrote the statute giving OSHA this power. But if that's the case, Congress can't really give OSHA power like that. And so there's an argument there as well. Again, all of these are going to have to be fleshed out in court. The Biden administration hasn't even had a chance to respond yet. So there will be more arguing about this in the days to come.
How long might these court cases take? President said that this rule was coming in September, and they just issued it. The COVID-19 pandemic is, not stopping for this. How long might this take?
I imagine that these cases will be like some of the others we have seen on some hot-button issues, including several that are COVID-related, that have just really been on the fast track through the courts. And so one can imagine that if the rules stay blocked here, that the administration could seek emergency intervention from the Supreme Court. Conversely, if this stay is lifted and the rules are allowed to move forward, you could see some of these litigants who have sued then taking their turn to seek emergency intervention from the Supreme Court, which would then be in the position of having to decide what rules should be in place or not be in place while these cases continue. So, litigation can take months or years to fully get through the system, but what really matters in these kind of fast-moving emergency situations is what are the rules right now. And so, given that compliance is supposed to start at the beginning of January, I expect that the courts will have to sort this out one way or another, in the weeks here leading up to that deadline.
While these cases are pending, legally, what should employers be doing?
I think that's a big question mark right now. The Saturday order caught a lot of people by surprise, I think, just by how quickly it came out and that it happened over the weekend. And so, I have heard from both employers and workers at this point who are trying to figure out, well, what does this all mean? What is the status of the rules? How long is this stay going to be in place? If I'm an employer, does that mean I'm still supposed to be working on getting ready to comply or not? And if I'm a worker, does this mean I'm going to be required to have the vaccines or be tested or not? And I think, we'll still have some uncertainty here until we get a little further guidance from the courts. The other big twist here, just so you know, is the way in this case it will work is there have been lawsuits filed in courts all across the nation. And so there will be something of a lottery system, and this could get sorted out next week, to consolidate them all in one court. And so once that happens, we may really be in a position for one court to focus more on this and to get this process moving pretty quickly.
Brent Kendall, Wall Street Journal legal affairs reporter. Find his work at WSJ.com. Follow him on Twitter at BRKEND. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, one of the Republican governors who has joined a lawsuit against the private employer COVID-19 vaccine mandate is Ron DeSantis of Florida. Today, he held a news conference with Republican leaders of the state legislature to talk about a special legislative session that's going to come up to and consider legislation designed to allow workers to opt out of vaccine mandates and also allow parents to sue schools with masking requirements. Here's the governor.
Nobody, no cop, no firefighter, no nurse, nobody should be losing their jobs because of these jabs. We have got to stand up for people and protect their jobs and protect their livelihoods. And we've seen the federal government, even though the Biden administration had always said this will never be mandated, and even they acknowledged the federal government doesn't have the power to mandate it. Fauci said it would never be mandated, and now all of a sudden they say there's grave danger, so it takes them 2 months to write a 500-page rule that they're trying to shove down the throats of the American people. That's wrong. Okay, it's wrong to treat people like that. It's wrong to kick people out of work. It's wrong to try to micromanage businesses like that. And it's wrong to potentially deprive key industries of people that we need. Trucking, nurses, all this other stuff. And probably most importantly, what they're doing is unconstitutional. And we have a responsibility to stand up for the Constitution. And that's what we're doing. But it's also, and it needs to be pointed out, it's not just the Biden mandate. I mean, you have some major corporations that are basically enacting policies. Maybe they just want to curry favor with the man. I don't know. But they're threatening to throw out people from work in the state of Florida. Many of these people who've come up to me and are concerned about this have recovered from COVID. And so these mandates ignore science because they don't recognize immunity conferred through prior infection, and it's just wrong. And so we have a responsibility, yes, to stand up against Biden's mandates, but we have a responsibility to protect Floridians regardless of those mandates. And it doesn't matter if the federal government stood down tomorrow, we still would need to act to be able to protect our nurses, to be able to protect our firefighters, be able to protect everybody in the economy. And so I called a special session of the legislature to be able to address this because we need to protect Floridians. We need to make sure that people can put food on the table and that their livelihoods aren't dependent on whether or not they do the jab or the booster or whatever may come down the pike.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican, with leaders of the State House and Senate, a news conference at a construction company in Zephyr Hills, Florida today. That special legislative session in Florida to consider the bills he talked about, together they're being called Keep Florida Free, begins November 15th. Washington Today continues in a minute.
This week on C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast, 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang argues that America's current economic and political systems are outdated and offers suggestions on how to transform both to address 21st century challenges.
And again, I'm not after 3 parties. I think there should be 5 parties or 7 parties. And if we had that, then you'd have shifting coalitions, just like our founding fathers envisioned. Our founding fathers, if they woke up today, they would be shocked and horrified by the fact that we have these 2 parties that are just going to clash until we're all in a country that we're not going to be able to recognize and we're not going to be excited to pass on to our kids.
Hear more on this week's Afterwards podcast. Find it and follow wherever you get your podcasts. And find it on the C-SPAN Now app.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines. A new USA Today Suffolk poll finding nobody in Washington, D.C. is getting high marks. President Biden's approval rating in this poll, 38%. Vice President Kamala Harris, 28%. Congressional Republicans, 35%. Congressional Democrats, 29%. And the Congressional Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol issuing 6 more subpoenas to associates of former President Donald Trump. They were involved in his efforts to overturn his defeat in the 2020 election. Those subpoenas going to Bill Stepien, manager of Trump's 2020 re-election campaign, Jason Miller, senior advisor of the campaign, Angela McCallum, National Executive Assistant to the campaign, John Eastman, a lawyer who advised the president, Michael Flynn, former National Security Advisor, and also Bernard Carrick, who the committee said paid for hotel rooms that served as command centers ahead of January 6th. First Lady Jill Biden and the U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy, in an effort to vaccinate against COVID-19 5 to 11-year-olds, there are 28 million in the United States, visiting today Franklin Sherman Elementary School in McLean, Virginia, in the Washington, D.C. suburbs. Back in 1954, this school was the first in the nation to host a polio vaccine clinic, vaccinating more than 100 second graders. As the New York Times writes, by spotlighting the school, the White House hopes to offer the public a reminder of an earlier era when the country pulled together to fight a terrifying disease. It was just last week that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention signed off on a smaller dose of the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine for these young children. The school principal, Kathleen Quigley, welcoming the First Lady and Surgeon General.
Welcome to Franklin Sherman. We are so excited to be hosting this kickoff event for the COVID vaccination for our youngest students. This has been amazing to be able to host you here. And I'd like to share with you a little bit of our history, because Franklin Sherman was the host of the kickoff site for the polio vaccination back in 1954. So back then, it was Dr. Richard Mulvaney, a local McLean pediatrician. You can see in some of the photos here, giving the vaccination to 114 brave students, mostly second graders, who we now refer to as our polio pioneers. And through their bravery, we were really able to eradicate polio, and that's what we hope can happen with COVID.
Yes.
Yeah. You'll also notice some posters behind you, posters over here. Look at these kids. Aren't they adorable?
Oh my gosh, this is so cute.
Cute smiles. There's cuter kids that you'll see inside. But here we have some posters. Our teachers took advantage of teaching primary and secondary sources. The children learned about the history at Franklin Sherman, the history of the polio vaccination, and they were instantly making connections to where we are with vaccinations today. And they made these public service announcements to make it easier for the younger children and to encourage them to be brave.
That's perfect.
With their vaccines.
Thank you.
All right.
Madam First Lady, what would you say to parents that are skeptical about giving the vaccine to kids? What would the Biden administration do in terms of messaging to make their minds at ease?
Well, I think our Surgeon General will agree with me, but they're safe, they're effective, and they're free. Vivek, do you have anything to add?
Absolutely. Look, I'm a parent too. First and foremost, I've got a 5-year-old son. I'm eager to take him to get vaccinated, but we want all parents out there to know these vaccines are there to protect our kids. We've been waiting for this a long time. We've got safe and effective options. We want parents to consider them strongly, get their kids vaccinated.
Thank you, Dr.
In just a moment, Dr. Biden, we are going to be leading you into the vaccination clinic in our gym.
First Lady Jill Biden, Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy, and the principal of Franklin Sherman Elementary School in McLean, Virginia. A survey released in late October by the Kaiser Family Foundation finds about a third of parents saying that they will get their children vaccinated, their young children vaccinated immediately. Another third saying that they'll take a wait-and-see approach. The last third opposed to vaccinating their children at all. The U.S. lifted restrictions Monday on travel from a long list of countries, including Mexico, Canada, and most of Europe, writes the Associated Press, setting the stage for emotional reunions nearly 2 years in the making and providing a boost for the airline and tourism industries decimated by the pandemic. Those coming to the U.S. by air need now proof of vaccination and a negative COVID-19 test. Those crossing in from Mexico and Canada on land must be vaccinated, but no test required. Ned Price talked about this at the State Department briefing. He is the State Department spokesman.
Starting today, foreign national air travelers to the United States will be required, with only limited exceptions, to be fully vaccinated and to provide proof of vaccination status prior to boarding an airplane to the United States. The new international air travel policy is stringent, it is consistent across the globe, and it is guided by public health. This new global travel system replaces the existing country-by-country restrictions putting in place a consistent approach worldwide. There is no need, as of today, for foreign national travelers who have been in one of the 33 countries with restrictions to obtain national interest exceptions in order to travel to the United States. When it comes to testing, fully vaccinated air travelers aged 2 and over continue to be required to show proof of vaccination and documentation of a negative COVID test, viral COVID test, taken within 3 days of the flight's departure to the United States before boarding. That includes all travelers, U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, and foreign nationals alike. To further strengthen protections, unvaccinated travelers, whether they are U.S. citizens, whether they're LPRs, or the small number of accepted unvaccinated foreign nationals, now need to show documentation of a negative viral COVID test taken within 1 day of the flight's departure to the United States. Again, this goes into effect today, and we know there is a welcome for it around the world.
State Department spokesman Ned Price in the State Department briefing room. Congressman Brian Higgins, the Democrat from New York, his district borders Canada and the Buffalo area, and he's been advocating for increased cross-border travel between the U.S. and Canada for months. But Higgins today is saying there is still an impediment that needs fixing: Canada's requirement of a negative PCR test to enter their country. And that can cost up to $300 and take 24 hours or longer to get results.
I was a kid that played ice hockey up in Canada. I spent more summers in Canada than I did in Buffalo. Our economies in Western New York and Southern Ontario in particular have been integrated. Our life qualities are integrated. Today marks the day that loved ones who have been separated for the past 19 months will finally be reunited. That is very, very significant. This border opening should have occurred 6 months ago. The United States and the Canadian government failed their people in developing a consistent communication strategy relating to the very thing that all of us have been admonished to do, and that is follow the science, follow the facts, follow the data. And when you do, there is one clear conclusion. If you are fully vaccinated, you reduce the spread and severity of COVID. And those who did the right thing, both Canadian citizens and US citizens, on behalf of themselves, on behalf of their families, on behalf of their immediate neighbors and their binational neighbors, should be able to cross the border once they certify, once they confirm that in fact they have been vaccinated. At 2:30 this morning, there was a 2.5-hour wait on the Peace Bridge of Canadian citizens coming into Western New York. By 8 o'clock this morning, that was reduced to about 38 minutes. The bridge, Ron Reines at the Peace Bridge, and the other managers of the 3 remaining bridges in Western New York have done a very good job in preparing for this day. We will see significant uptick in economic activity, but we're still doing it with one hand tied behind our back with this redundant, unnecessary testing requirement.
Congressman Brian Higgins of New York, Democrat, a virtual news conference today with mayors of U.S. and Canadian border towns. CBC in Canada reporting that the Canadian Chief Public Health Officer, Theresa Tam, acknowledged recently that the coronavirus PCR testing policy was being actively looked at. The U.S. requires only a rapid antigen test, which is far less expensive and provides results in as little as 15 minutes, but it is not as accurate. On Wall Street today, the Dow is up 104, NASDAQ up 10, S&P up 4. Federal Reserve Governor Randall Quarles says he is resigning near the end of this year, giving President Biden an opportunity to make another appointment to the Federal Reserve Board. Quarles has been on the board since 2017, and his term doesn't expire for another 11 years. CNBC writes in recent weeks he has become a lightning rod for criticism from some of the more progressive congressional leaders. Senator Elizabeth Warren has been one of the more vocal critics, faulting Quarles and Fed Chair Jerome Powell for loosening the regulations that were put in place following the financial crisis. Incidentally, the Fed Chair Powell's term also expires at the beginning of next year. This from NBC News. Federal prosecutors revealed charges Monday against a Ukrainian man accused of raking in millions of dollars by carrying out ransomware attacks that targeted businesses in the U.S. and around the world. Court documents unsealed Monday accuse him of conducting around 2,500 ransomware attacks that brought in $2.3 million in payments to unlock infected computer systems. Attorney General Merrick Garland making the announcement at the Justice Department.
Today we are announcing that we are bringing to justice an alleged perpetrator of a significant, wide-reaching ransomware attack. On July 2nd, the multinational information software company Kaseya and its customers were attacked by one of the most prolific strains of ransomware, known as R-Evil or Soda no Kibi. To date, R-Evil ransomware has been deployed on approximately 175,000 computers worldwide, with at least $200 million paid in ransom. As a result of the Kaseya attack, businesses that relied on Kaseya services across the United States and around the world were impacted. 6 weeks later, on August 11th, the Justice Department indicted Yaroslav Vasinski, also known by the online moniker Robotnik. The indictment, which was previously under seal, charges him with conspiring to commit intentional damage to protected computers and to extort in relation to that damage, causing intentional damage to protected computers, and conspiring to commit money laundering. The indictment charges that Vasinski and co-conspirators authored R-Evil software, installed it on victims' computers, resulting in encryption of the victims' data, including in the July 2nd attack, demanded ransomware payments from those victims, and then laundered those payments. 2 months after the indictment, on October 8th, Vasinski crossed the border from Ukraine into Poland. There, upon our request, Polish authorities arrested him pursuant to provisional arrest warrant. We have now requested that he be extradited from Poland to the United States pursuant to the extradition treaty between our countries. Today, we are unsealing Vasinski's indictment. Vasinski's arrest demonstrates how quickly we will act alongside our international partners to identify, locate, and apprehend alleged cybercriminals, no matter where they are located.
Attorney General Merrick Garland at the Justice Department in Washington. He also announced charges against a Russian man, saying that the U.S. government had recovered $6.1 million from him. This is all part of a law enforcement investigation called Gold Dust, involving the United States and 16 other countries against those who commit ransomware. Associated Press reporting satellite images show China has built mock-ups of a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier and destroyer in its northwestern desert, possibly for practice for a future naval clash as tensions rise between the nations. The images captured by Colorado-based satellite imagery company Maxar Technologies, dated Sunday. Reaction from the U.S. Defense Department, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby with reporters.
As USNI first reported, China has apparently built mock-ups of the U.S. aircraft carrier and some other warships to practice bombing runs. How concerned is the Pentagon about this? And is this just another sign of escalation of, potential conflicts with China?
I'll tell you what we're concerned about, Tara, is the increasing intimidation, coercive behavior of the Chinese military in the Indo-Pacific, and also the coercive tactics they are using, using economic tools around the world to bend other nations to their will or to their view of what's in their best interest. We are in full support of a free and open Indo-Pacific, and we're going to continue to work towards that goal with our network of alliances and partnerships. And again, you've heard the Secretary talk about this many times. He holds the PRC as our #1 pacing challenge, and what we're focused on, I haven't seen these images, and they can speak to what their bombing runs look like. That's for them to speak to. What I can tell you is we're focused on developing the capabilities, the operational concepts, making sure we have the resources and the right strategy in place so that we can deal with the PRC as the #1 pacing challenge.
One follow-up and then a separate topic. I mean, but doesn't the Pentagon find it concerning that there's a very active, now visible kind of practicing, again, for a potential future conflict? Or do you treat this as just another, maybe it's their version of a tabletop wargaming?
Again, they can speak to their exercises and what they're training against. It's been fairly obvious, and we just released a China military report a week ago that I think makes it very clear what our understanding of their intentions are and their capabilities are, and how they're developing those capabilities and to what ends. And clearly, they have invested a lot in particularly air and maritime capabilities that are designed largely to try to prevent the United States from having access to certain areas in the Indo-Pacific. What we're focused on is that pacing challenge and making sure that we maintain the right capabilities and the right operational concepts to meet our security commitments in that part of the world.
Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby. The British online newspaper The Independent, covering the story, writes, Chinese Information Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin said in response to questions about the images, "I'm not aware of the situation you mentioned." President Biden on Sunday condemned the attempted assassination of Iraq's prime minister in a statement saying, "I strongly condemn the terrorist attack targeting the residence of Iraqi Prime Minister al-Kadhimi. I am relieved the Prime Minister was not injured and commend the leadership he has shown in calling for calm, restraint, and dialogue to protect the institutions of the state and strengthen the democracy Iraqis so richly deserve." The attack was carried out by a drone that had explosives. Back to the U.S. State Department today and spokesman Ned Price.
Iraq and the assassination attempt, what are your initial findings in terms of who may have been responsible? There's an obvious neighbor that had sponsored militia attacks before, and how that might affect other diplomatic.
Well, when it comes,
will there be another U.S. response? Will there be a U.S. response?
When it comes to the culpability, there's an Iraqi investigation that's underway. We are going to defer to the Iraqis for the progress of that investigation. We have made very clear, Secretary Blinken has made very clear, President Biden has made very clear in his statements that the United States stands ready to assist in any and every way we can with the Iraqi investigation should they request our assistance. But broadly, and to come back to your question, we are outraged and we strongly condemn the attack on Iraq's prime minister. The Prime Minister Kadhimi, represents not only the head of government, but he represents the state of Iraq. And he is the commander-in-chief of Iraq's security forces. And therefore, we believe that this was an attack not only on him, but also on the sovereignty and stability of the Iraqi state. As I said before, the president has issued a very clear instruction to his national security team that we are to provide every form of appropriate assistance that our Iraqi partners may need in this. As you know, Secretary Blinken had an opportunity to speak yesterday with Prime Minister Kadhimi. He reiterated the same message. He condemned the attack. He noted his relief that the Prime Minister was unharmed in this. And he also underscored the importance we place on our partnership with the government of Iraq and pledge to support the Iraqi security forces as they investigate this.
State Department spokesman Ned Price. No group has claimed responsibility for the attempted assassination of the Iraqi prime minister, but as a Reuters story reports and as the reporter asking Ned Price references, Reuters saying it was carried out by at least one Iran-backed militia, Iraqi security officials and militia sources said, weeks after pro-Iran groups were routed in elections they say were rigged. For the first time in 5 years, an NBA basketball championship team visiting the White House. Milwaukee Bucks won their first title this past summer in 50 years. The NBA champions from 2017, 18, and 19 did not go when Donald Trump was president, and in 2020, there were COVID-19 travel restrictions. President Biden welcoming the Bucks on the White House South Lawn, and during his remarks, making reference to the two big spending bills he's been pushing. One he's about to sign into law on infrastructure, the other, called Build Back Better, social spending, still in Congress.
This year marks the 75th anniversary of the NBA. During that time, we've seen generations of players define their eras with their styles and the play and their personalities. And we've seen a distinctly American game become the fastest growing sport in the world. The fastest growing sport in the world. When I first went to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping, he put me out on a basketball court. I'm not like these guys, I can play a little bit, but put me on a basketball court. And I'm thinking to myself, everywhere in the world I go, as I travel the world, basketball. And the best players want to come to America, though, in search of possibilities. And through it all, one thing remains constant: the values of the game and of the sport. Teamwork, hard work, respect, and the belief that we can strengthen the bonds that bring us together and stand up for something bigger than ourselves. The first time NBA championship team visited the White House was in 1963, when President Kennedy hosted the Boston Celtics. A few months later, in August, Bill Russell returned to Washington, this time to stand on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to hear Dr. King and his speech on I Have a Dream from the whole nation. Today, I'm honored to welcome the Milwaukee Bucks to continue that tradition. In sport and in democracy, unity, perhaps, is the most elusive thing and the most necessary thing. But that's who this team is. They're unified. That's who we are as a nation. As we saw over the weekend with the getting closer to passing the consequential investments in our nation and our people, there's nothing stopping us when we work together, nothing. And as one team, as one nation, there's not a thing we've ever failed to do. Never, ever, ever, when the American people have given half a chance, they ever let their country down. And just like you've worked together, and watching you has just been incredible. So congratulations to the Milwaukee Bucks. The best of luck for the rest of this season. Actually, this is a season just beginning for us here. But all kidding aside, best of luck next year, but you all are the best. You're the best, and it's a great honor to have you here.
President Joe Biden with the 2021 NBA champions Milwaukee Bucks at the White House. They were in Washington, D.C. for a game against the Wizards Sunday night. Wizards beat them, but the season is just beginning. Thanks for listening today to Washington Today. For more top Washington stories, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Tuesday morning, we'll discuss recent election results and what it means for Democrats and Republicans in 2022 and 24, starting with former New York Democratic Congressman Steve Israel. And then Ethics and Public Policy Center Senior Fellow and Washington Post columnist Henry Olson. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our new mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, texts, and tweets.